So basically, Richard Dawkins says you cannot prove there is not an invisible, undetectable teacup rotating around the Earth. That's
right.
But not most people wouldn't support a financial expedition to prove that there is. So why would you believe in God? Because you also cannot prove definitely there is no God. So it basically says God equals rotating teacup around the Earth.
Well, yeah, but he does seem to be saying then that until you can prove God, I actually just argued against that. He does seem to be saying unless you can prove there is a God, we don't have to believe in God. And I was saying very few things can be proven that way. I mean, Richard Dawkins has had almost no positive reviews from scholars because most folks in the philosophical world know that that idea of classic foundationalism, I don't have to believe in something unless it can be proven, that almost nobody in the philosophical world believes that because that very idea can't be proven. See, the problem with the old logical positivists, the classic foundationalists, this idea that said, it was called the verification principle, and the verification principle was, unless it's empirically possible, unless God kind of shows up, that's what he's saying in that teacup, unless God sort of shows up and creates footprints. Now, Christians can talk about the resurrection, but if you want to ask me about that, I'm not going to go there for now. Let's just talk about God in general. The idea that God has to create empirical footprints that I can verify, that's the verification principle. The trouble with the verification principle, which is that I don't have to believe in something unless it can be empirically proven, is that you can't empirically prove the verification principle. And I was trying to say that most of the things that we base our life on cannot be proven. Our moral convictions can't be proven. And yet we have evidence for these things. Some make more sense than others. And I'm just saying, let's decide whether there's a God the same way we make decisions about everything else. Richard Dawkins is pushing he's actually pushing a kind of outmoded approach to epistemology. All I can say is, no, he can't prove God that way, but, and I said, if I come to you and say there's an abominable snowman in Tibet, you don't have to believe that unless I can prove it to you. But God is different. I'm not sure what I'm doing to do this. God, however, is different. He's not something inside the universe. And of course, by the way, this is the end of this. The idea that science can only work on empirical objects is right. But I'm trying to say that there's no way that you can live life that way because most of the things that we believe and base our lives on are not things that we can prove. That's all. So you ought to read Terry Eagleton's review in the London Review of Books on Richard Dawkins' God delusion, and he gets at this idea that God is an object that has to be proven. See, the whole idea that an invisible teacup makes no imprint, it's just his way of saying, I don't have to believe in God, it has to be empirically proven, and I tried to speak to that in the lecture. Somebody else?
Dr. Keller?
Yeah.
You might have a microphone so we'll get the battery in there for you.
You think that's what it is?
That's a possibility.
Actually, so the reason it wasn't I assume will be audible. Ask the question.
I'd like you to respond to a quote. It's a fairly postmodern quote by a guy named Joseph Campbell. It said, God transcends all categories of thought, including existence and non-existence.
Well, of course. Does that mean he doesn't, in other words, he's above that, but it sounds like he's trying to say he's actually, if he's God, he'd have to be able to transcend all categories of thought, but it sounds like Joseph Campbell's trying to say we can't talk about it. And that's sort of assuming that if there's a God, if the traditional God has made us and created our minds and given us our categories of thought, and it would make sense that we'd be able to at least describe him. I mean, most theologians would say our knowledge of him is analogical. It's not direct. That is, when we say he's like this, it's still telling us something about him, but it doesn't capture him. And so it sounds like, it's almost like saying, I think he's saying, here's our categories. Now, we can't fit God into our categories, absolutely not. But for him to say God can't get into our categories, I don't think I would agree. I would say, if he's really God, he ought to be able to fit in my categories. Otherwise, he's not omnipotent. If he's really, really God, he ought to be able to make himself understandable to me so that I can at least talk about it. It's a pretty big leap of faith to say God's nature is such that he would be impotent to appear at all in our categories or transmit himself in our categories. So I would say that it's, I don't know the motivation. He's right in wanting to honor the size of God and the magnitude of God, but I think he's wrong in saying God can't fit into my categories. Okay, thank you.
A few weeks ago, there was a speaker who came to Stanford and argued for the case that evolution and faith can coexist.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that there are a lot of Christians who would disagree. What do you think?
That's good. What I would say is that inside robust Orthodox Christian faith, you've got people that have worked out different understandings of how creation and evolution work itself out. I can tell you of at least 6 different ones. And some are more friendly to evolution and some are not as friendly. Now here's why this is good, why this is good news. It's good news because if you are on the outside looking in, you can't, if you talk, for example, one of the 6 positions is evolution's a total crock. Evolution didn't happen. You know, the earth was created 6 24-hour days not that long ago. Now, if you think that's ridiculous, you look at that, and there's a tendency for you to think, and also, very often the people in that position maybe want you to think that that's the Christian position. It's a simple demographic fact. It's not. Christians who have a high view of the authority of the Bible and who have a traditional understanding of Christian doctrine, Christians are at different places on the spectrum about that. And what that means is, from the outside, that's not the first place you go to decide whether Christianity is true or whether there's a God. Don't go there. Because if you start to say, well, here's my view of evolution, well, you know what, you're probably going to fit somewhere in that spectrum. But right now, the important thing is did Jesus rise from the dead? That's how you decide whether or not Christianity is true, not by looking at evolution. After that, you go back to evolution with your new understanding of who Jesus was and work it out then. So now if you're asking me, I know a little bit about that guy, right, Francis Collins, right? See, here Francis is a scientist, not a theologian, and he said that. Okay, I'm a theologian, not a scientist, and I'm saying. So all of us have an unguarded flank, as it were, when you come up here to try to represent Christianity like he did, or faith in God. So you come after him on, if you believe in evolution largely, then what about Genesis and that sort of thing? Well, he's talking more like an amateur. And when you come to me and start asking me about evolution, how that works, I'm talking like an amateur. And that's the reason why I'm not getting too detailed. But what I really want you to see that have you heard of theistic evolution? That would be where Francis Collins is, that God used evolution to bring things about. Progressive creationism. Progressive creationism is kind of middle ground, saying that there were creative acts that God did over a period of time. So you don't have complete transmutation of species, you've got something kind of in the middle. There's all kinds of pretty sophisticated approaches that are sophisticated when it comes to biblical exegesis of Genesis and sophisticated when it comes to science. I can't give them to you because that's actually not my bailiwick. But it shouldn't be something that freaks people out so much when it comes to thinking about God and Christianity. I actually feel that there are some scientists and some Christians, a minority of scientists and a minority of Christians, who desperately want us to think there's an absolute war going on between science and religion. It actually helps them It just ain't true. We ought to read, Christian Smith wrote a book. No, Christian Smith, who's a sociologist, edited a book called The Secular Revolution. It's about 3 or 4 years old, and it is an amazing book. And it's a book on how secularization happened in higher education, not simply because we were getting more modern and therefore people became less religious, but he shows almost pretty much proves historically that people on both sides of the fence, both people in religious posts and people in some of the new institutions like Cornell, which is like the first major university that wasn't a religious institution. I mean, all the early universities were to start with. That there were vested interests that people had to pick religion and science as being at war. But the great majority of scientists, of course, believe in God, and they just don't have the same conflict. So I would just say it's a bit of, I think it's, I'm not saying it's unimportant. I'm not saying it doesn't bear a lot of discussion. But when it comes to thinking, do I believe in God or not, or do I believe in Christianity or not, I think it's a red herring. Okay, don't go there first. Somebody else?
So I know you addressed a lot about God in general,
Yeah.
but I was wondering within religions, particularly between
Sure.
Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, what gives Christianity more validity? And I know that you probably can't go into deep arguments, so where
No,
would
you're
you
right.
start?
Well, yeah, I mean, you saw how sketchy even what I did was. If I say, here's why I'm a Christian, here's why you ought to think of Christianity, it's really another whole lecture. But here's how I would go. Here's what I would do. In a way, you don't really have to look at all the other religions to figure out whether Christianity is better than other religions. Here's why. Every other major religion anyway, has a founder who says, I'm a prophet, come to help you find God. Only Christianity has a founder who said, I'm God, come to find you. Radically different. Jesus makes unbelievable claims. I mean, he said, at one point he says, I saw Satan fall from heaven like lightning. So you sit there, can you imagine the people around him saying, when was that? Where were you standing? And who the heck are you? And there's one place where Jesus says to the Pharisees, he says, for years I've been sending you prophets and wise men, and you've killed them all. What? You're the one who's been sending the prophets and the wise men into the world for this century? And there's a place where Jesus says, before Abraham existed, I am. So there's these unbelievable claims. And here's the good thing. Christianity will either be a better religion than the others or a worse religion, but it cannot be the same. So in other words, either you've got, I mean, if he really is the Son of God, then that's the superior way to find God, for crying out loud. If he's not, then it's a fraudulent or deranged kind of religion. You say, well, people say, well, I just follow the teachings of Christianity. I don't worry about the doctrine, which shows you haven't read the teaching. Because the teaching of Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount, is just absolutely permeated with his claims and based on his claims. So what you've got is, it's nice and simple. You've got either Christianity's true, and therefore the way to God, or it's not at all a good thing. It's really, really, really kind of corrupt and twisted. So all the other religions are roughly similar because all the rest are saying, whether Buddha or Confucius or Mohammed, they're actually coming and saying, I have the wisdom from God. Here's how you should live. Here's how you please God. And in a way, you can compare them because, is this wiser than this? You can compare them. Christianity comes along and it's sui generis. It's just a whole different thing. It's not the same category. And so that's the reason why go there and check out whether Christianity is true or not. But don't think it's just up there in the shelf with all the rest. Now, here's how I would do it. You've got to come to believe that the gospel accounts of Jesus' life are basically reliable. I know that's a stretch for a lot of you. I suggest a new book by Richard Balkan called Jesus and the Eyewitnesses. I think Jesus and the Eyewitnesses is a book that is so radioactive that I think it will not get reviewed because it would basically make a lot of the current biblical scholarship in the whole world obsolete. Probably probably, the way things work is it won't get reviewed because it's very hard to refute, and generally what's going to happen is younger PhD students right now who are getting convinced by it will probably base their work on it. In a couple, 20 years it'll be very influential. For now it probably won't be. But it's, the point of the book is, makes a very good case that the Bible, that the Gospels are not oral traditions that were passed along from generation to generation for years before they're written down, but they were oral histories. Not oral traditions, oral histories taken down intact from the eyewitnesses' mouths while the eyewitnesses were still around. And the eyewitnesses are named in the Gospels to authenticate the Gospel. And it's a tremendous book, and it really, everybody's going to have to deal with it. If you want to say, well, you can't really trust the Gospels, say it's legend, you got to read that book. You don't have the right to just walk around believing that. If once you've read that, and you say, okay, I believe the Gospel is basically reliable, then you have to deal with a second point, and that is, did Jesus rise from the dead? And that's the crux. There I would read N.T. Wright's book, The Resurrection of the Son of God, 800 pages, tremendous historical scholarship, in which he basically argues, at a very high level, that there's no historically possible alternate explanation for the birth of the Christian church other than the bodily resurrection. And just to give you one little piece and then I'm done, okay? But I've saved you another lecture, everybody. You know, this is another 45-minute lecture. You know how all the accounts of the resurrection, all of them, have women as the original witnesses, Mary Magdalene, etc. The first people who saw the risen Christ were always women. Now, what the historians will tell you, including N.T. Wright, is in that day, there were women were of such low status in society that their testimony was not admissible evidence in court. They could not testify in a Roman court, in a Greek court, or in a Jewish court. That's how bad it was. So if you were writing up a document to try to convince people that Jesus rose from the dead, you would never put women in as the first witnesses. Never. It would undermine the credibility of the document with anybody, pagan, Jew, Gentile, Greek, whatever. And so the only possible explanation for the fact that women are in the resurrection accounts as the first witnesses, the only possible explanation for that is that they were. There is no other reason why anyone would ever write those documents like that. So that's the kind of argumentation that really puts you back and starts to make you say, wow, whoa, so maybe people really did see him rise from the dead, it's not all religion. So I would say, trust the Gospels, takes time to figure that out. Check out the doctrine of the resurrection, look at the claims of Jesus. When that's all done, make up your mind. And if you think it was a fraud, or you think he was deranged, move on to some other religion. If not, go with him. That's how I would, you just asked, how would I counsel somebody to kind of work through it? That's what I would say. Okay. Because sorry it was so long, but it was also basically summarizing the second lecture and saving you all a whole other night. Okay, over here.
Irrespective of any proof for God, for you, what does it mean to believe in God?
You mean how it happened to me, maybe?
No, on a day-to-day basis, for anyone that leaves this lecture hall tonight, what does it mean?
Well, I'll just go back to the three buckets and I'll give you an example. I said the original way in which I believed in God was in college, and the intellectual, the personal, and the social. Intellectually, I was wrestling with issues like evil and suffering and the other kinds of objections to the existence of God. Personally, I had some experiences when I was in college that showed me that I wasn't such hot stuff, and I saw some of my weaknesses. And the problem for me was socially. I saw a lot of people that were committed to justice, but a lot of my friends who were committed to justice didn't believe in God and basically felt that morality was socially constructed and it was basically relative to whoever, your culture, etc. And I said, okay, here are the people who believe in justice. They're working for justice. They're going down into Mississippi and Alabama, and at that time they were risking their lives by working for the Voting Rights Act, and they were great for justice, and yet they were relativists. I mean, their own belief system didn't, in a way, back their justice, and they admitted it was a leap of faith. They admitted that in spite of the fact that I don't believe in God, I still believe in justice. Why? Well, I don't know. when I saw Christians, a lot of traditional Christians, who didn't care about justice at all and thought Martin Luther King Jr. was a communist. So I say, okay, here are the people with belief in God, don't care about justice. Here are the people who care about justice. They're, have really no warrant. And when I finally found some Christians that really were passionate for justice and they rooted it in the doctrine of God, that was the third bucket. And when I found that, along with the personal experiences that were leading me to think maybe I needed God, the intellectual thinking that was showing me that Christianity made sense, etc., it all came together and I believed. Now, 2002 I had thyroid cancer. And show you my scar, you can say, it'll probably be on YouTube, right? And they said, oh, it's pretty treatable and all that. It doesn't really matter. When somebody tells you have cancer, it focuses the mind wonderfully. And it was hard, am I going to die? That stuff, am I going to die? That's a tough one. So they took the thyroid out, and for the first time in years, and for probably the last time ever, I had a month or so to recuperate, and I had time on my hands. So I got this book by N.T. Wright, who was brand new at the time, called The Resurrection of the Son of God, 800 pages on the resurrection. And what was intriguing was I had time, I read every word, I read every footnote. Not only because I had the time, but because I was suddenly confronting death. And so, when you actually confront the possibility of death, you realize, maybe I don't believe this as much as I thought I believed it. That book took me down into a new level of certainty. Because it was, in other words, it went deep into the intellectual bucket. Meanwhile, I was down deep in a personal bucket. And not as much as the other one, at that point. But when it was all done, I remember closing the book. When I was done, and I said, oh my gosh, it happened. I said, well, didn't I believe it? Haven't I been preaching that? And I realized I believed it at a new level. In other words, they came together again. I just moved down to a new level of peace. And I remember the last time I went under surgery, they're putting the mask on you, and you never know. You put the mask on you, you say, this could be it. And I remember having an idea. There's a line at the end of, near the end of the third book of The Lord of the Rings, there's a place where, Sam the Hobbit, this is not in the movie, it's only in the book. Sam the Hobbit is sort of in despair, and he walks out, and he looks up at the sky, and he sees this light, this star. And I remember Tolkien's prose said that the thought struck him like a shaft, cold and clear, that in the end, evil in the shadow is just a passing thing. There's light and high beauty forever beyond its reach. And as I was going under the mask, I was going under, I had this idea, I suddenly realized if the resurrection is true, then the universe is this ocean of joy and glory. And we just happen to be locked in this tiny little speck of darkness for a period of time. Just a little speck in this ocean of joy. And it's going to go away eventually. That's what the resurrection means. Eventually God's going to end all evil and suffering. And we're going to have a material universe and new bodies. And as I was going under, I suddenly realized it didn't matter if I died or not. My kids were going to be all right. My wife was going to be all right. Life was going to be all right. Everything was going to be all right. So what happened was, I wouldn't say I was struggling with doubts. It's just that, I had a new personal experience of weakness. I had a new input of reasoning and thinking about, why I believe what I believe, and it just took me down to a new level. I might say it's sort of the uttermost foundations almost of stone, but maybe not. Maybe I'm not as solid as I think. Maybe there's a newer level beyond that. I hope God doesn't have to do anything quite that drastic next time that he might. Okay, that's how it works. So the same three buckets basically work. Okay? Over here.
Hi, my name is Derry. I have a question. In this talk, I get an impression that I get an impression that what matters is whether a person believe or not believe, and there is and you said that if someone believes in God, then it makes more sense, or it just makes sense to our rational, right?
Yeah.
Actually, I myself don't have problem with believing in God or not believing in God, because I can easily say, for example, oh, I believe in God. For example, I just say that. But to believe in God is more than just to say I believe in God, something like that, right? So now I'm wondering, okay, so like, can you elaborate what does it? I mean, like, what does believing in God entails? And if it entails like, if it entails believing in certain things like some traditions in particular religions, or believing in some characters like Jesus or some teachings, like, why do we need that entailment of belief?
I don't think I didn't quite understand the very last sentence.
Sorry.
Death, you said?
Oh, sorry.
Death. That, I thought, okay.
Okay, so okay, I summarize 2 questions. First,
Now I got you.
okay, like, could you elaborate what to believe means more than just saying I believe,
Yes.
and why do we need that?
When I talked about the branch at the end, you know, when I said, if I might be sure that, I might think the branch will help save me, but I have to grab the branch. Remember that illustration? In other words, I may, with my reason, come up with a hypothesis that the branch will save me. But I have to grab the branch for it to actually save me. Its strength actually come into my life, as it were, to save me. Reason won't do it. There has to be I have to act on what my reason tells me. This is probably the right thing, and then I grab it. So faith in God is like that. You're right. With my mind, I may, you might actually think, reading my book, thinking about what I said, then I say, I feel more convinced that there's a God than I did before. That could easily happen, especially if you were here, kind of, your faith is sort of squishy, and maybe it's a little firmer. But it's that personal commitment. It's the grabbing the branch. Now, what does that mean? This is where you can't just, here's where, I don't know if you're getting this, my friend, but I think if you are, it's very wise. You have to get down into a particular tradition in order to actually grab God, not just believe in Him with the head. So, for example, Islam says, here's how you please God. The Quran, the Bible says, here's how you please God. You rest in Jesus Christ instead of your own works for salvation. So, if you just have a bare belief in God, you actually can't commit to Him, so you can never really have faith. In fact, this is something I hope some of you aren't too offended by. It doesn't matter, I got the microphone. But you remember the Stepford Wives movie? The Stepford Wives movie is you have I think in the first movie they replaced the wives with robots. In the second movie they put a microchip or something in their head. But the point was that these men wanted wives who never could contradict them. Yes, dear. Whatever you say, dear. That sort of thing. And of course, what you have then in a Stepford wife is you don't have a personal relationship. There's no real personal commitment to each other. She's just a robot. Right? Now, if you just believe in God in general, you can't personally commit to Him unless God limits you somehow. Unless God can contradict you. Unless God can talk back to you. Unless God tell you some things that you don't want to hear. So that in order to commit to Him, you're going to have to say, well, I'd rather do this than this, but if He asks me to do that, then I'll do that. So, if you don't have a God who can contradict you, tell you things, you've got a Stepford God, a God that you've created, a God with whom you can have no personal relationship at all. And therefore, you're absolutely right, just to believe in God is not real faith. It's certainly not going to change your life. You've got to find the God of Islam, the God of Christianity. Obviously, as you heard a minute ago, I would say, and as I said at the very end, the God of Christianity actually can tell you things that you never want to hear. In fact, whenever people come to me and say, well, I don't like this part of the Bible. This part I like, but this part just offends me. And I always say, look, 2 things. One is, if God really was a transcultural God, a God above everything, then when God brings His word down into the world, it's going to offend every culture at some point. So if it's not the product of Western culture, Eastern culture, but it was the product of God, then God's word will offend you at some point. There'll be something that you hate about the Bible, or it wouldn't be true. It wouldn't really be transcultural revelation. It must be something you hate. And that's your opportunity to have a personal relationship with God. To not just believe the things and commit yourself to things that you like to hear, but the things that you don't like to hear, but you say, okay, And that's what it means to be married. Otherwise, you've got a Stepford wife, you've got a Stepford husband, or whatever. So you can't just say, I believe in God. You've got to get into a faith. You've got to get into a tradition. You've got to get into a congregation. You've got to get into a community, or you can't really grab the branch. So there's some ideas. Probably not sufficient, but better than nothing. Thank you. Over here? Nobody left? Oh, okay.
Hi. You mentioned that the argument that evil and suffering at the philosophical level is pretty much an argument that doesn't hold water anymore. And my question is that why do you think we should value this philosophical reasoning as opposed to the opposing street reasoning, particularly when evil and suffering seem to occur on the street level?
Well, I'll tell you why. Because dealing with it at a philosophical level is so much easier. That's why I did it. I wanted to, here's one. If you personally have just been really hurt, I've seen people whose struggle is personal level, and they hide behind the philosophical. In other words, they get into classes and they argue the philosophical. I would rather strip away the philosophical and say, the emperor has no clothes here. It just doesn't really work very well. But I don't want to then say there's no problem. I want to one of the reasons to strip away the philosophical is so we can get down to the personal. Now, with the personal, here's what I'd say. And I think it's actually pretty important. I don't know what in fact, I spoke at an interfaith service once. I didn't know it was interfaith till I got there. I had no idea, but there it was. And it was a 9/11 memorial service. Actually, it's probably online somewhere. It was at Ground Zero. And there was like 500 or 600 people in the audience. There was, you did have, the governor, the mayor, Hillary, Bush, and Laura. Everybody was there. Amazing. But most of the people who were there were all survivors. People who had lost loved ones in the 9/11 attack. So hundreds of people whose lives had been just destroyed. And so what I did was I said, look, I'm sure other religions have resources for dealing with suffering at the personal level. Okay. But I'm a Christian minister, so I can only give you mine. And here's what I know. And that is that we're the only faith that actually says God loved us so much that he actually has come into the world and made himself subject to suffering. So whatever you've experienced, injustice, have you lost, I said, have you lost a son in the tragedy? So did God. Did you lose a son to an act of injustice? So did God. Did you get betrayed? Were you abandoned by your friends? So is Jesus. So the idea is that no other religion would even dare say that God has actually come in and experienced human suffering. Our God has. Why? Out of love for us. Out of a desire to be in solidarity with us, to save us so that someday, save us from our sins, so someday he can end all evil and suffering without ending us. But here's where that brings me. It's sort of a personal philosophical. If you see Jesus doing that, and you believe that's God enmeshing himself in our suffering, now I still don't know what the reason is that he allows evil and suffering. I still don't know what the reason is, but now I know what it isn't. It isn't that he doesn't love us. It can't be that he doesn't care. And see, I think that's the thing that most people struggle with. They say, what is the reason that God allows this to continue? And I say, I don't know. Well, see, what they're assuming is, it's because he doesn't care. But so if you believe, this is resources from inside faith. If you've got faith that Jesus really is the Son of God, and he came and did this, you've got an enormous resource now. You can say, I don't know what the reason is why I'm suffering, but I know what the reason isn't. It can't be that he doesn't love us. It can't be that he doesn't care, because if he was willing to get enmeshed in my suffering like that, so anyway, so there are resources for the personal that kind of overlap with the philosophical, like I just showed you there, from inside Christian faith. So I'm going to keep going until the moderator says one more, two more, three more, no more.
We have time for about 2 more questions.
Okay, especially if I'm concise. Okay.
You obviously consider Christianity to be the best answer to the question of religion.
Yeah.
Yeah, specific custom or even racial, racial cultural background. Do you think there could be a better one that could hinder less the whole cultural?
Okay, good question.
Question?
Yeah, I get it now. Actually, at first I was thinking you were saying, could there be a better religion? I said, I don't know how, unless somebody else came along and said, I'm the other son of God. I'm the older James, my younger brother, really. All right, maybe it's a better religion. However, this is, I do want to do another one besides that. I'm going to try to make this short enough. Christianity is actually on its way to being that religion that you want. And here's what I mean. Hinduism started in India, and that's its demographic center. The vast majority of Hindus are Indian. Buddhism started in India, it migrated, but its center is a little bit further northeast of India now, but Buddhism has always, the vast majority of Buddhists are still in Asia. The vast majority of Muslims are still, Middle Eastern. But what's happened to Christianity is very weird. Christianity is the one rotating religion, because Christianity originally was Jewish-driven, and then it became Greek-driven. That is to say, not that there haven't always been Jewish Christians, but the Greek church, the demographic center became the Mediterranean. Then it migrated to Eastern Europe. Armenia was the first Christian nation, so forth. Then it migrated to Western Europe. Then it migrated to North America. And every time that happened, there was a huge amount of the culture. There was a lot of Greek thought that went into it. When Christianity comes into a culture, on the one hand, it learns from the culture. On the other hand, it transforms the culture. So, for example, even the doctrine of the Trinity, to a great degree, is reliant on Greek philosophical categories. Now, as you know, I mentioned this before, what's actually happening now is right now the average evangelical Christian is non-white and non-Western. By far, vastly more. If China, for example, right now has 80 million Christians, and probably in the next 30 years it's going to go to like 300 or 400 million. And so the leading, probably, this is my guess, is that the leading church over the next 100 years will not be the North American church or the European church or the Greek church. It'll probably be the Chinese church. And when that happens, when you get a big, Christianity will change Asian culture, and Asian culture will contribute to Christian theology, as it always has. And Andrew Wall, who teaches at University of Edinburgh, I guess he's retired now, has actually said Christianity is on the verge of becoming the first truly universal religion, where you actually have African, Latin American, Asian, European. You really have not just most Muslims are Arab, or Arabic, and there's scatterings everywhere else. Christianity has moved its demographic center this direction, and it's on the verge, really. It'll take another 200 years of being the very first truly Catholic religion in the sense of being universal, really getting every race's input. So Christianity's not there yet, but it's definitely on its way. I can take one more. I'm sorry, I have to go over here.
Hi, thank you for coming tonight. My question is...
Thank you. You're the first person to thank me.
So my question, from a Christian perspective, I often get the question, how, coming from a person of faith, can you believe in condemning those traditions, such as Hinduism, Buddhism, that come from such a rich culture and I guess idea of, those people that haven't heard some textual or philosophical account of what it is you believe, and how is it that you can condemn these people to hell or what have you because they don't believe that one true faith, and how do you reconcile that?
How to get it in, didn't you? Good. No, good. Look, I just said a minute ago, I said, as a Christian, I don't condemn other people. I'm just trying to say, what do you do with the fact that either Jesus is the Son of God, unlike any of the other founders, or he's not? In other words, he's either the way, or he's not. He's not just another prophet that everybody... there's three problems with saying, well, what about all the good Hindus? There's three problems. One is, I don't know. We don't know, for example, what happens... Christians don't know what happens to infants that die. in infancy. We really don't know. I don't know how God works the calculus out. And it's not my business. That's one thing you have to be careful about. It's better to go and look at Jesus' claim and say, look, either he's the true way to God because of his claim, or else he's an idiot, or he's a fraud. He's not just one good religion along others. Second issue is when people say, what about all the good Hindus or the good this? Well, now, Christians don't believe that you go to heaven because you're good. Christians believe you go to heaven because you know you need the mercy of God and you admit you're a moral failure. So when people come to me and say, don't you believe that there's good people who would go to heaven besides Christians? I say, heck no, Christians don't go to heaven because they're good. They only go to heaven because they admit they're not good. Sure, if a Hindu wants to admit, I'm absolutely a moral failure, there's absolutely no way I could possibly merit God's grace, I have to throw myself completely on his mercy, that person's practically a Christian. You see, I mean, so the point is, Christians believe you don't go to heaven by being good. So, of course we don't look around and say, oh, there's all these good people around. So, I was a good person, I was on my way to hell. I mean, I'm getting to the gospel now. You're pressing me on this. But the gospel is Christian soteriology. See, Christian's ethics is not that different. Christian ethics is not that different than Islam in some ways, or Buddhism. We all believe love your parents, we all believe don't lie, respect life, help the poor. The ethics is similar. It's the soteriology that's utterly different, and that means how do you connect to God savingly? And Christianity would say you don't do it by being good. So these are the reasons why Christians don't condemn people to go to hell if they're not Christians. Christians just say the only way that we know to go to heaven is through the mercy of Jesus Christ. You throw yourself on his mercy. And when it comes to, well, what about my Aunt Ethel? And what about the infants? And what about the people? It's not my business, actually. I mean, I only know what I've been told, and this is what I've been told. One other thing you got to keep in mind, and this is it. This is really it, right? This is it. Americans get really bent out of shape about the idea that there's one true way to God. Most cultures in most places don't get that upset. You know that. All the people you're worried about, they're not as upset. All those people over there, they're not upset about that. Here's why. We are so sure that democracy is right. Egalitarianism is right. Individual rights is right. We are so the product of Western enlightenment thought that we just feel like God has got to be like a president and give everybody a vote. And if not everybody gets a vote, there's something wrong. Now, if you go over to the Middle East, if you go to China, if you go to anywhere else in the world and say, there can't be one true religion, they'd say, why not? They don't have a problem with that. And so, in a way, if you are really bent out of shape about the idea that only Christians go to heaven, that's actually perhaps ethnocentric of you. Now, in other words, in a way, you're so inhabiting your culture that you feel like, my culture's problem with Christianity is the ultimate problem with Christianity, when a whole lot of other people don't have a problem there. So, but in the end, nobody goes to hell. Here's the last thing I said. Nobody goes to hell unless they want to go. That's the Christian understanding of hell. Christian understanding of hell is everyone in hell is there because they want to be there and they don't want to leave. And people who want to be with God will go to be with God. People who want to live their own lives and they want to be their own saviors, they want to be their own lords, hell is where they go because that's where they want to go. Nobody in hell wants to leave. They all say, well, it's not very nice here, but who wants to be up there in heaven with God pushing me around? And if that is really weird and you don't understand that, you don't, I think, understand it even harder. Maybe you don't understand Christian theology. So the idea that God throws people into hell as they're dying, and they say, no, let me out. And God says, no, it's too late. Because you had your chance. He said, well, I was born on a mountain in Tibet in the 13th century. I never heard tough. You're laughing, you should, because if that's what you think, that's a caricature, that's not Christian theology. People go to hell because they choose and they want to stay there. People go to heaven because Jesus is there and they want to be with him. People get what they want. But there's plenty of mystery in that. I don't know what happens to infants, and I'm not sure I know what happens to your Aunt Ethel, and it's not my job.